race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to my podcast called Above the Yellow Line. It's the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. This podcast specifically is dedicated solely to a race recap of the Dixie Vodka 400 that was raced this weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway by the Cup cars. There was no Truck Series race this weekend, so nothing to cover there, but I do want to mention a congratulations to the Xfinity Series winner, Myatt Snyder, who won his first Xfinity Series race ever, so congratulations to him. This seems to be a season of firsts for all the series, the Trucks Cup and Xfinity, so it is going to be a very exciting and thrilling season to watch. It already has been, so with the excitement, let's go straight into the Dixie Vodka 400 with a race breakdown. Homestead Miami Speedway is a 1.5-mile track. This weekend's race is 267 laps and is 400.5 miles long. Stages 1 and 2 are 80 laps each, with stage 1 ending at lap 80 and stage 2 ending at lap 160. The final stage of this race is 107 laps. I want to quickly mention on lap 25 we will have a competition caution, and this is because the cars cannot have practice or qualifying due to COVID, so the competition caution is solely for the purpose of getting the cars to pit road after running a few laps on the track to make much needed adjustments to their cars. Speaking of the cars, let's line up the field and show you the starting lineup for this race. I showed the starting lineup for this race in the last podcast, but there are some updates here. As you see, there are some cars that are to the rear. Most importantly, your pole sitter, Denny Hamlin, was sent to the rear about an hour before the race due to unapproved adjustments to the car. So he is one of the few cars that were sent to the rear. Another car was Alex Bowman, and then we had Corey LaJoie, and then we had Davison, who was sent to the rear of the field, having to fight their way back on this 1.5-mile track. Other than those changes, there was nothing new besides Logano now leading your field to green, so with that, let's start by recapping Stage 1. There was not a lot of action or not a lot happening in Stage 1, so we're going to be very brief with the first 25 laps of this. Logano led, and then Keselowski took over at lap 13, and then they threw out the competition caution for the cars to come in and make much-needed adjustments on the cars. These adjustments did not take very long. Unfortunately, though, we had some mishaps on pit road. The only car to lose a substantial amount of spots was Kyle Larson, a Hendrick Motorsports car. He lost 5 spots. I mentioned in the past, especially last podcast, and I've mentioned this before, at least on social media, that the Hendrick Motorsports cars seem to have really inconsistent pit stops, whether they gain spots and they lose a lot of spots. There's a lot of mishaps. Not to say that the pit crew is bad at all. There just needs to be more consistency, and Kyle Larson was not the only Hendrick Motorsports team member to lose a substantial amount of spots on pit road and in the field tonight because of the pit stop. So we'll move on from the pit stops. As I said, it was a short one, and we go back to green on lap 31 with Keselowski leading. And at this point in the race, we're going to go to lap 36, where I started to see a lot of surprises in the race, and we started to see our top 10 of the night kind of shape up. Now, we had names like Keselowski, Logano, and Harvick in the top 10. There was no surprises there at this point, but then we had Chris Buescher. We had William Byron, we had Stenhouse Jr., Larson, Kurt Busch, Newman, and Bell. They are not your typical top 10, and you just don't see those cars and those drivers in the top 10, and I mean no disrespect to these drivers because they would not be in these cars if they did not have the talent to back them up, but they're just not names that you see in the top 10 for maybe 20, 30, 40 laps at a time, but these drivers stuck to their guns and held their ground and stayed there. To mention Chris Buescher, by the way, he was your leader on lap 53. He made his way to the lead, and he led the most laps he has ever led in his whole career tonight. So I was extremely impressed with his driving abilities tonight and the way he was able to hold that lead, and he had a huge lead, by the way, for the majority of this stage. That lead even held after a caution on lap 64 brought out by James Davison, who had an engine go down, unfortunately, so at that point James Davison was out of the race, and same with Timmy Hill, who had an incident earlier, and unfortunately that incident for Timmy Hill ended his night. So we had pit stops happening on lap 64, and pit stops usually make or break a team's night, and luckily for Chris Buescher, he was able to maintain his spot on pit road and back on the track. His crew did an amazing job maintaining his track position, and Chris Buescher had an amazing race start and was able to maintain the first position, winning him stage 1. Let's look at the rest of the finishing order for Stage 1, looking at your top 10. We had Chris Buescher, of course, finishing first. Then we had Brad Keselowski, Truex Jr., Byron, Bowman, Larson, Logano, Elliott, Kurt Busch, and Austin Dillon. And take a look at this top 10 in particular because you can see all the Hendrick Motorsports cars finished in this top 10 for stage 1, which for me is impressive. We have seen Hendrick Motorsports kind of waver for the past few years, with Elliott leading the team in many victories. So it is very refreshing to me to see all the Hendrick cars in this top 10, especially Kyle Larson, who ran a very good race today and was able to maintain a top 10 spot for pretty much the whole entire race. And as you know, he's coming to Hendrick Motorsports after having a year off of the sport, and he's coming back in this season very strong. So like I said, very impressive from Hendrick Motorsports, and they continue to be pretty impressive for the majority of the night in Stage 2. So let's start with talking about Stage 2 here. The restart order, your top 5 for Stage 2 was Buescher, Keselowski, Bowman, Elliott, who gained 4 spots on pit road after his pit stop, which was not one of the unfortunate accidents for Hendrick Motorsports tonight on pit road. And then Logano finished out that top 5. So on green, Chase Elliott kind of came out of nowhere and led the field, and then Buescher quickly took it back, saying, nope, this is my race, I am taking the lead. So Chris Buescher started to lead Stage 2 at this point. I mentioned Hendrick Motorsports at the end of Stage 1, racing together, doing really well. There was also a lot of sneaky and exciting movement happening in Stage 2, so we're going to start with the Hendrick Motorsports camp in general. At this point, lap 89, we had Larson in second, Byron in third, Elliott in fourth, and Bowman in seventh, running in the top 7 together, which was very exciting. We also had some movement from Kurt Busch, who was in sixth, very holding strong. He has done an incredible job with these first 3 races. You can give him a road course, you can give him a super speedway, you can give him a 1.5-mile track, or 1.5-mile track, and he will be fine. He is really holding his own this year, and I'm honestly hoping he can contend for a championship. I love Kurt Busch, so I'm hoping that happens. Also, towards the front of the field, we had Hamlin, who was moving up to 9th after having a really rough time moving to the front of the field from starting in the rear, so he finally moved his way into the top 10. Another driver who moved his way into the top 10 was Austin Dillon in the 10th spot. Finally, we have Martin Truex Jr. up to 3rd, who began to contend for the lead, fighting against Buescher, and then we had green flag pit stops on lap 117, starting with Newman, starting the chain of getting the drivers onto pit road. Once these pit stops cycled through, Martin Truex Jr. led the race over Kurt Buescher with about a 4-second lead, and then we started to see the race shift to be a little more, I don't want to say chaotic, because this was not as chaotic as the road course or Daytona, but it started to have some shifts here. Lap 131, there was a very scary mishap from Chase Elliott. I'll show you right here. Chase was racing 3 wide with Larson and Keselowski, and you can see here he just tries to do a slide job, and it barely works. Very scary thing. I am thankful that Keselowski decided to check up a little bit, because I know, especially Keselowski said in the past, if you try to throw a block on me or try to do, something like Chase Elliott did. He said this Daytona last year or 2 years ago, I believe. He's like, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm basically going to run you over. So Keselowski did a very nice job reacting very quickly and checking up, because that could have been a very bad wreck that ended both their nights, but luckily it did not. And this interaction seemed to change their nights. They both kind of slid back from the field at this point on, and that is because pretty much on lap 138, the track started to shift as the sun went down, the track started to cool, and basically, if you don't have your cars prepared for this, or you haven't made the right or the proper changes to your cars before this point, you're going to move straight back in the field, and we had a lot of cars beginning to do that. And we also had a lot more aggressive driving, and we had a lot more mishaps as cars tried to move their way to the front of the field as they were capable, and a lot of cars, like I said, sliding back. One of these cars that started to have a mishap, or did have a mishap, was on lap 153. Corey LaJoie, unfortunately, threw a caution and was out of the race. He was having a great race tonight with a new team, new car, new everything, and unfortunately was out of the race at this point. And that was with 7 to go in the stage, so we had pit stops with about 4 to go. Hamlin was able to gain 5 spots on pit row, and I want to give a shout out, to the JGR pit crews, who do such a great job at getting their team back on track. They are the ones that if their drivers tend to mess up a little bit or have a tough time, their pit crews are able to be like, we got you, driver, get them back into contending position. So great job for the Hamlin pit crew. Unfortunately, a pit crew that kind of lost momentum here. I'm not sure what happened, but Chris Buescher lost 3 spots, and at that point, his race was kind of not done for the night, but that was the point where I knew that he wasn't going to be able to contend for a win after having a very successful night. Not to discount the success he had, but at that point, his chances of winning the race were kind of done. So like I said, Denny Hamlin was back in contention, and we had a 1-lap shootout in stage 1, and I will show you exactly what happened here. We had the drivers restarting, and Denny Hamlin seemed to pinch Martin Truex Jr. into the wall, kind of here trying to race for the win. He was trying to get in front of Truex, I think, trying to get that position, shoved him pretty much into the wall, and William Byron took advantage of that and won stage 2, getting around those two drivers after they tried to duke it out for the first position. As you can imagine, Martin Truex Jr. was not happy with his teammate for making that move on him. There was some swearing on the radio. There was some swearing. Nevertheless, they both finished pretty well in stage 2. Let's go over your top 10. Of course, I said William Byron took the stage. Hamlin was right behind. Kurt Busch, like I said, Kurt Busch having a great night, finishing in the top 5 of this stage. Then we had Martin Truex Jr. finishing 4th. Larson, Buescher, Harvick, Blaney, Bowman, and Keselowski. And I want to mention Blaney real quick because we see him in the top 10 finishes of the stages. We don't see him a lot during the rest of the race, and I have opinions. I have opinions on him, and I know he's had a really rough last season, and he tends to do really well and then falls behind. Not much to mention there right now. Hopefully he's able to gain more momentum, and I'm not sure why his teammates are having more success than him, but I'm hopeful, and I'm hoping that Ryan Blaney can have more success in the future tracks. I'm hoping this is just a little bit of a hiccup to start the season. We'll skip over that right now, though, because we have to talk about pit stops. Only a few cars came to pit because of the caution with 7 to go in the stage. These cars were Truex, who was looking for damage on the car after he and Denny Hamlin had sort of a tumble there with a race for the stage 2 finish. Bubba Wallace came to pit road, Kyle Busch came to pit road, and Ryan Blaney. With those cars coming to pit row, we have a restart order, a top 5 restart order for the final stage on lap 168. That order is William Byron, Hamlin, Kurt Busch, Larson, and Buescher, restarting your field and leading them to green. And this is a restart I have to show you because Buescher ended up getting loose. There was a 4-wide restart, which was nuts, and then Buescher just kind of sent the rest of the field all the way back. Anyone who was behind him basically slow trained it back with him. Unfortunately, Chase Elliott had the bad end of the deal, who was literally directly behind Chris Buescher, and both of the cars started to move back. And as the track changes, I told you if you don't make the right adjustments to your car, you're not going to fare well. Other cars that tended to move back towards the end of the race, and we'll talk about their finishing position here in a few minutes, was Logano and Keselowski. They just could not handle the track change, and I actually have no idea what happened. But when those cars moved back, there was also a lot of cars that moved forward on this restart. Truex Jr. was one of them who started 17th on this restart and moved to 5th in like less than 1 lap. So that was impressive. Another impressive restart was Harvick, who moved up to 6th. And Tyler Reddick broke the top 10 for one of the first times tonight. I don't think it was the first time, but he broke the top 10 and he continued to move forward until the end of the race. With all this movement, by lap 175, we started to see the field flip. A lot of the cars that were in the back of the field really came to light as the lights went down on the track and started to charge towards the front, which means there's probably more aggressive driving as these drivers scramble to make up lost time. There's 2 moments in particular that I want to talk about and show you. One comes from the cars of Ross Chastain and Matt DiBenedetto. Matt goes down on the track. I think he just has a really big run trying to make it around, and Ross Chastain, as you can see here, just totally goes to block, very aggressively block this move. I'm not sure the purpose of it. I'm not sure what Ross thought he could gain from the block, but happened and pretty much got the cars sideways. Another aggressive move I have to talk about here came from lap 199 from the cars of Aric Almirola and Ryan Blaney. There was actually a caution thrown for this. The cars got into each other, and I'm not sure what Aric Almirola's spotter was telling him. I'm not sure exactly what Aric Almirola was doing. He did say that the car got tight, but in this replay, as you can see here, Aric Almirola is trying to do a slide job on Ryan Blaney's car, and Ryan just has so much momentum coming off of the wall. Aric is not able to make the pass, clips the front of Ryan Blaney's car and gets into the wall himself, causing some damage on both of their cars. And here's a replay of a close-up from Aric's point of view on his car into Ryan Blaney's. So that caused a caution because debris went onto the track and then cars started to pit. And with this pit stop came a very crucial penalty for one of the drivers who I thought was going to win this. My pick to win this race was Denny Hamlin, and he got a penalty with this pit stop for going too fast on pit road, essentially ending his night and his chances for a win. I was very bummed because I wanted my pick this race to be right, and he had the stats and the odds in his favor this race, and unfortunately things just did not go well from the beginning. So Denny Hamlin was now to the rear as we restart with 60 laps to go, where William Byron takes the lead. And I'm surprised and I'm not surprised that he's in the lead at this point for the fact that Hendrick Motorsports as a whole has had a very good night for this race at Homestead. He's been in the top 5, top 3. He's contended for the lead the whole race, so I'm not surprised. I'm very impressed that he was able to stay in the top spot. There were some surprises, however. Lap 213, I want to talk about some of the top 10 players here. As I said, the top 10 all night was pretty much a mixed bag of new and old faces that just boggled my mind. We had Cole Custer up to 4th position on lap 213, who we have not talked about at all this race. He seems to be in and out of contention for top 10 spots, but he was in 4th, holding his ground. We had Michael McDowell, who won the Daytona 500, trying to prove that it was not a fluke, it was not a mess up, in the 8th position, and also held his ground. And then we had Kyle Busch up to 9th, finally breaking the top 10, and I will say something about Kyle Busch. He does not quit. I don't care if you like him, I don't care if you don't. He has a no-quit attitude. He can be all the way back in 20th, be yelling on his radio, complaining about his car, saying it's broken, it's totaled, anything and everything, but he will literally finish in the top 10 or top 5 almost every time. No quit attitude. His brother, who was up to 5th at this point, unfortunately, and I say this because it was unfortunate, he led such a good race. On lap 227, had to go into the pit because he had a loose tire on his car. He was running extremely well, and unfortunately, just the vibration on his car, the loose wheel. He did the responsible thing, by the way, of coming in instead of causing a caution and potentially getting another car involved in a wreck. He came to pit road, did the responsible thing. Unfortunately, took him out of the contention for a win, but did not end his night, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the ending positions of these cars. So to get there, let's fast forward to the last 5 laps of this race, where there was an epic 3-way battle for second place, and I say for second place because William Byron at this point was pretty much gone. This battle was between Larson, Truex Jr., and Reddick, who fought hard for second place, and Reddick eventually, after a mishap, ended up winning this battle against Larson and Truex, and tried to charge hard to the front of the field, but unfortunately it was not enough. William Byron pulled away ahead of these 3 cars and was your winner of the Dixie Vodka 400. The young driver did an impressive burnout to celebrate his win. He was very happy at the win. I was happy to see him win. He really deserved that. Let's show you your finishing order here. Let's talk about William Byron for a few seconds. He won with his new crew chief this season, Rudy Fugle, and just after 3 points races. That's something you don't see a lot. That is very special to win a race with a new crew chief in the first few races. So very impressive from him. He went from 31st, starting 31st in this race, to 1st. So this was not a fluke. He just had a strong car and a lot of teamwork tonight. So congrats to him on the win. It was really deserved. He led the most laps this race too, so really deserved. Let's talk about other drivers who got really deserving finishes and did really well. Of course, we have to mention Tyler Reddick, who finished 2nd after that really intense battle for 2nd with Truex and Larson. This is Reddick's best track, so there was no surprise that he finished well. It was just a little scary to see him in the very back of the field racing to the front. He did race in the Xfinity race on Saturday and also finished 2nd. Unfortunately, his car was disqualified due to height requirements that just didn't match up at the end of the race. But he finished 2nd here too, and all went fine. If he deserved this win, he charged his way to the front of the field. Unfortunately for him, though, there just was not enough time to fight back and contend for the win with William Byron, who was just way ahead. But a great finish for Tyler Reddick, who, by the way, if anyone was to win this race as a first-time race winner, it would have been Reddick. Everyone online agreed. There was no question. So he proved that he has the capability and proved everyone right. So again, congrats to Tyler Reddick. Another driver who had a very impressive finish was Kevin Harvick, who was sneaked his way into the top 5, finishing in the 5th position after having a kind of difficult night. We saw him in the mix a little bit, but just wasn't talked about a lot, as we talked about him last season after he dominated and won 9 races. They call him the closer for a reason. He starts in the back, he's in place 20th, and before you know it, you're at the end of the race, you're looking at the roster, and he's first place or top 5. So Harvick also had a very good night. Michael McDowell also had a great night, finishing in the top 10, and he's finished in the top 10 for all the regular season races so far, so he is definitely proving that his Daytona 500 win was not a fluke. He has been very consistent and has been very impressive to watch. I also quickly want to mention Austin Dillon, who had a pretty good night tonight, moving well in and out of the top 10. He started 22nd and finished 12th. So very impressive from Austin Dillon. We did see him get some stage points tonight, so very good for him. Now, unfortunately, we have the good and we have the bad. Let's talk about the drivers who just did not have it in them tonight, who just did not do well. Of course, we have to talk about Denny Hamlin, who just did not rebound after his pit penalty for speeding. He finished 11th this race. That penalty just killed his chances of a top 10 or a top 5 finish. He was definitely not going to win from that spot. So my pick to win, unfortunately, just did not finish well. Other drivers who didn't finish well would be Christopher Bell, who I don't know if I was surprised he didn't finish well. I was more surprised that he didn't finish in the top 15 or top 10. After winning last week's race and showing some strength, he finished 20th. Finally, a group of drivers I have to mention was Team Penske. I have no clue, literally no clue what happened to their cars. Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano ran well at the beginning of the race, but just totally fell back. Brad Keselowski finished 16th, Joey Logano finished 25th, and Ryan Blaney, who just had issues all night long, ended up finishing 29th. So really not a good night for the Penske camp. A lot to work on when they get back to the racing headquarters. So a lot of team with a lot of work to do, and a lot of teams sitting pretty in the playoff points picture. We're going to look at your top 16 in points right now. We're also just going to look at all the points in general. We have your drivers that are already locked into the round of 16 playoffs. We have Michael McDowell winning the 500. We have Christopher Bell, who won the last weekend's race at the Daytona Road Course. And now we have William Byron, who is locked into the round of 16. They don't really have to worry. I mean, they should worry about points, but don't have to worry about fighting their way into the playoff picture. So congratulations to them. Even with their wins, let's look at the points and how they line up. Denny Hamlin, Harvick, Logano are your top three in points. Michael McDowell holding steady in fourth with points. Very impressive. I hope he's your dark horse this year to be in a championship or at least do well in the playoffs, so maintaining that points position. Chase Elliott is fifth in points. Then we have Kurt Busch, who, like I said, I want him to be in the championship for this year. I love him as a driver. He's very respectful. He's also just a great driver and very underrated. So I hope he does well as well. Then we have Christopher Bell right after. And then you have the rest of the round of 16 in points. Bubba Wallace is right now in the round of 16, and I'm also hoping he continues to make progress during these races, and I'm hoping that he can contend for a win eventually this season. So let's end the podcast with some post-race thoughts, and we have to, of course, rate the race. I want to mention some teams I noticed doing well today. Of course, I mentioned the Hendrick Motorsports camp doing very well. The Roush Fenway Racing camp, the number 6 and 17 teams, were in the top 10 a lot of the night, and that was very impressive from them as well. I also want to talk about how impressive this racing was. There was a lot of movement tonight, and there was racing. Obviously, we started on super speedway and a road course, so there's really not anything to there's not consistency to go off of here, but the racing tonight was very exciting for me. There was some slow pacing, but overall there was movement, and that was what I wanted to see. I wanted to see these cars actually contending for wins, and I didn't want to see just straight line, boring racing where you're like, okay, when are we going to have a commercial? Very exciting stuff. There wasn't wrecks. That doesn't make a race exciting. Actual racing, movement, and cars going for spots makes racing what it is. So I was very excited and stoked to see that, and that plays into my rating for the race tonight. So speaking of my rating, let's see if this race places above the yellow line. Any rating I give from a scale of 0 to 100, if it's above 50, that means it's above the yellow line. Anything below means it was kind of a crappy race. Fell below the yellow line, wasn't good. So all things considered, like I said today, I thought was a very good race. There was a lot of movement on the track, and there was a lot of new faces at the front of the field, which to me is very refreshing to see. If I'm comparing this to the last two races where there was a lot of chaos, a lot of I don't know. There was just, the last few races just weren't good. Wrecks don't make good races, racing does. Contending for a lead and wrecking to get the lead to me is not a good race. It's exciting, but it doesn't make the race great. To me today, the race was great, and I have to give this race a rating of 90%. That might be a little high. I might regret it later if I see other races, but if I'm comparing it to what I know now, I'm giving this race a 90%. After this race and seeing the top 10s, I have no clue who's going to be contending for wins week to week. We had the road course, we had the super speedway, we have so many different tracks this season. The consistency is just going to be so weird. So it's going to be who can do all the tracks the best. And so far, I kind of think Kurt Busch. I mean, he's done really well in the super speedway. He's done really well on the road course. He's done really well tonight too. So I think he's one to watch out for this season. So with that one to watch this season and hopefully seeing who's going to be contending for wins this week, that is all I have for you for this Dixie Vodka 400 race recap. Thank you so much for watching Above the Yellow Line, the podcast where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Thank you so much for joining me again. And next time we'll talk about updates of the series, and we'll talk about a pre-race podcast for the next race in the series. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time, I'll see you.